Also, the man who plays Hank Reardon in Atlas Shrugged is a New Zealand actor named Grant Bowler.
That's right.
I bet you didn't know that. And my book, Barack Obama and the Enemies Within, is almost as big as Atlas Shrugged. So there's some connections there. So thanks very much for having me here today. I love the Tea Party. You know, you guys are the salvation of this country. There's no doubt about that. You know, I wouldn't have believed 5 years ago there was going to be a constitutional movement in this country that would influence politics right across the nation. If you told me that, I wouldn't have believed it, but I'm so happy it's happening today. So, look, I want to talk about something that hardly anybody in the Tea Party talks about, and I'll lead into this. But first of all, I want to say, a lot of people ask me why, as a New Zealander, I should care about your internal politics. I'll say there's two basic reasons. The first is gratitude. My country is only free because of the huge sacrifice of your fathers and grandfathers and uncles in the battles of Guadalcanal and the Coral Sea and midway in World War II. You guys saved our bacon. The second reason is a little more selfish but very much related. Ronald Reagan had it right. This is the last best hope of mankind. If freedom fails in the United States, if you lose your world leadership and your military superiority, the bad guys of this planet, the Russians, the Chinese, the Cubans, the Nicaraguans, Venezuelans, North Koreans, and all their crazed allies will carve up this globe amongst themselves. Now, I live way down in the South Pacific, and most Kiwis are very cocky. They think nobody's ever going to bother us. But 1,500 miles to the north of New Zealand lie the beautiful Fijian Islands. Wonderful tourist destination, but they now have a Marxist government. The Chinese are training the Fijian military and are building big hydroelectric dams on the islands. Fiji is now a Chinese client state. That is happening right throughout the South Pacific. A few months ago, the Australian Minister of Defence was up in China, and a senior Chinese defence official embarrassed him by saying, now is the time for Australia to choose. Do you stay under American protection or do you come under our protection? And coming from Chicago, you all know what kind of protection that would mean. And that would not have happened under Reagan or Bush or even under Clinton. But right now, all your allies around the world are freaking out. The Taiwanese, the Japanese, the British, Australians, New Zealanders, the Israelis, they're all freaking out because of the direction of the leadership of your country right now. It doesn't seem like you're friends of the West anymore. It seems like you're more friends of the other guys. And I want to explain why I think that is exactly what is happening. But I want to, you know, why is your president like he is? Why is he leaning towards the Palestinians and the Russians and the Chinese and all the tyrannical powers of the world? Well, where else would he go, you know? His first mentor was Frank Marshall Davis. Chicago communist, writer, journalist, very active in the black art scene, very vibrant scene in Chicago of the 1940s. But in 1948, he left all that behind and went out to Hawaii in the Pacific. Now, why would he do that? Because at that time, Stalin had ordered the American Communist Party to put as many comrades out into Hawaii as they could to monitor activities in Pearl Harbor, to spy on your military base, and to get it closed down. Because your military was then and remains now the #1 enemy of the Russians and the Soviets, the Chinese, the Iranians and their allies. It is their #1 priority. So Frank Marshall Davis went out there, he worked for the Honolulu Records, he was active in the Communist Party, infiltrated the Democrat Party, but he also had a little bit of a hobby. And the FBI, who are watching him for 19 years, and who compiled a 600-page file on the man, had reports that Frank Marshall Davis was seen on many occasions photographing obscure Hawaiian beaches with a camera with telescopic lenses. And they, I think, suspected espionage because they put Frank Marshall Davis on Security Index A, reserved for the most dangerous communists only. Had war ever broken out with the Soviet Union, Mr. Davis would have been arrested that very day. And this was a man who had the ear of your president for 9 or 10 of his most formative years, from the age of about 11 to the age of 19.
That's right.
The man who wrote poems praising the Red Army, praising Stalin, and viciously criticising racist KKK America. Frank Marshall Davis is mentioned 22 times in Obama's book, Dreams from My Father, as a mentor, a guide, and influence. Not once is his full name given, and that's hardly surprising. But what about another one of Mr. Obama's mentors? It's very little talked about, but she should be. When Mr. Obama came to Chicago to start his political career, he'd already been to Harvard, where he was mentored by the pro-Cuban Marxist Charles Ogletree, who also mentored Michelle, by the way. He had his sights set on a political career, and the first woman to get Barack Obama started in politics was an Illinois state senator named Alice Palmer. Now, she worked with Obama for several years. They worked together in the Marxist New Party. But Alice Palmer had his sights set on Congress. And the deal was, she employed Obama as a chief of staff. The deal was, you get me elected to Congress, Barack, I'll give you my state senate seat. So they worked together on that. And Alice Palmer took Obama around to all the people he had to know. It was Alice Palmer that took Obama to the famous meeting in the drawing room of Bill Ayers and Bernadine Dawn in Hyde Park, Chicago. Obama's introduction to the Hyde Park left. Incidentally, Obama's doctor was there as well, a man called Quentin Young, who just happens to be the founder of the socialised healthcare movement in this country. Openly claims credit for indoctrinating Obama into the ideas of socialised healthcare, and just happened to be a 40-year veteran of the Communist Party USA.
Mm-hmm.
But things don't always go smoothly in politics, and Alice Palmer didn't win her primary. So she said to Mr. Obama, look, sorry, Barack, can you wait a couple of years? I want my state senate seat back. But Obama said, no, sorry, Alice. And he got her disqualified off the ballot by challenging her signatures. And he got all the other opponents disqualified as well. And that caused a big ruction on the Chicago left. And a communist named Tim Yule Black was brought in to mediate, but it didn't work, and Palmer and Barack went their separate ways. But it is fair to say that Alice Palmer got Barack Obama started. But Alice Palmer had a record. In 1980, she was invited to the first anniversary celebrations in the Caribbean in Grenada by the communist dictator of that island, Maurice Bishop, to the first anniversary celebrations of that country's Marxist-Leninist revolution. In 1983, she went to Prague in communist Czechoslovakia for a meeting of the Soviet Front World Peace Council. Now I want you to place a lot of importance on this, because the World Peace Council was the Soviet Union's, that still exists, the Soviet Union's #1 international front. They put hundreds of billions of rubles into this. It was used for agitating against NATO, against Star Wars, against your military alliances in Asia and Africa and in Europe, etc. It was the Soviet Union's #1 propaganda tool against your military. The #1 tool. And Alice Palmer was intimately involved at the highest levels of that. The World Peace Council had affiliates all over the world. In this country, it had the US Peace Council, which still exists. and Alice Palmer served on the executive of the US Peace Council, alongside 16 members of the Communist Party USA, and a woman called Barbara Lee, who is now a congresswoman out of California. And when all the California Democrats were going for Hillary in 2008, Barbara Lee was the first California Democrat to come out for Mr. Obama. So Alice Palmer was also running the Black Press Institute out of Chicago, a nationwide network of communist black journalists whose job was to sow Soviet propaganda amongst your country's black population. In 1985, she took 16 of these people to East Germany, Czechoslovakia and the Soviet Union for meeting with a whole bunch of high-level communist officials and the editor of Pravda. In 1986, Alice Palmer covered that year's annual conference of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union in Moscow. The same year, she was elected North American Vice President of the International Organization of Journalists, a bona fide Soviet KGB front aimed at influencing journalists all over the world. And her job was to look after activities of that organization in Canada, the United States, the Caribbean and Mexico for the Soviets. So to put it bluntly, Alice Palmer was a high-level Soviet operative with connections to the highest levels of the communist bloc regimes. So Frank Marshall Davis, communist, possible Soviet spy; Alice Palmer, Democrat, Soviet operative and high-level peace operative. What about the people around Obama today? I could go around all night on that, but I'll just pick on two. First of all, the other half of Obama's brain, and even the Liberals call her that, Valerie Jarrett.
Yep.
Okay. Introduced Obama to his wife, smoothed his way through the daily side of Chicago politics, and now sits in the White House as his closest friend and most trusted advisor. I would say the most powerful woman in America. But what about her pedigree? Where did she come from?
Mm-hmm.
Well, Alice Palmer, Valerie Jarrett, her mother is Barbara Bowman, child psychologist out of Chicago, runs the Erickson Institute, which has had a lot of influence on early childhood education in your country. In 2009, Mr. Obama gave Barbara Bowman an award for her work, and that award ceremony was prominently featured in the pages of the Communist Party USA's People's World. The Erickson Institute was named after a man called Erik Erikson, an errant disciple of Sigmund Freud, the guy who ever heard the phrase identity crisis.
Mm-hmm.
That was Erik Erikson. He was kicked out of Berkeley University in the 1940s because he refused to sign an anti-communist loyalty oath. He was also a lecturer at the California Labor School, the Communist Party USA's main trade union school. On the board of the Erickson Institute have served Tom Ayers, a businessman in your city, and the father of Bill Ayers, the famous Weather Underground terrorist.
Mm-hmm.
Also serving on that board has been Bernadine Dawn, the wife of Bill Ayers and a terrorist in her own right. Valerie Jarrett's maternal grandfather was Robert Taylor, the first black head of the Chicago Housing Authority. Back in 1940, he was a prominent leader, along with Frank Marshall Davis, of the American Peace Mobilization, American Peace Mobilization. That was a major communist front, and their job was to keep you guys out of World War II. They were pro-peace, pro-isolationist, keep American boys out of Europe. That was their slogan. But in 1941, Hitler betrayed Stalin, invaded the Soviet Union, and overnight, within 24 hours, American Peace Mobilization became American People's Mobilization, the most pro-war, let's get Hitler, let's screw the Nazis organization in the country. because the sacred Soviet Union was under attack. So Robert Taylor, Valerie Jarrett's grandfather, worked in that with Frank Marshall Davis. On the other side of Valerie Jarrett's family was a man called Vernon Jarrett, prominent Chicago journalist. The last thing he did when he was dying of cancer in 2004 was to issue a call from his deathbed to the black population of South Chicago to get out and vote for Mr. Obama in that year's Senate primaries. Go back to 1946. Vernon Jarrett was serving on the Illinois State Executive of American Youth for Democracy. Wonderful sounding organisation.
Right.
Youth wing of the Communist Party USA. In 1948, Vernon Jarrett was serving on the Packing House Workers Strike Committee, Publicity Committee. Packing House Workers were a communist-controlled labour union. They were on strike, and Vernon Jarrett was writing their press releases and propaganda. On that Publicity Committee, with Vernon Jarrett, served Frank Marshall Davis. So isn't it interesting that these two people that run your country from the White House can both trace their political lineage back to the Communist Party USA of Chicago of the 1940s, and specifically to Frank Marshall Davis? Wouldn't read about it, would you?
No.
Except in my book.
Yep.
So what about the other half of Mr. Obama's brain, which doesn't leave very much, to be honest? Dirty David Axelrod.
Yeah.
The man who's sitting in Chicago right now trying to engineer your president's hopefully unsuccessful re-election campaign.
Amen.
Wins his elections, wins elections primarily by blackening the name of his opponents. As Mr. Ryan found out here in Chicago a few years ago.
Jack Ryan.
Jack Ryan, sex scandal, records unsealed.
Yep.
That's why Mr. Obama, as Mr. Romney is now facing stories about gay haircuts and his time with Bain Capital and his tax returns, the strategy will be to destroy the opposition, not to promote the candidate. But where did David Axelrod learn his trade? Well, when he came to Chicago in the early 70s to study political science, he was picked up and mentored by two prominent Chicago journalists / activists, Don Rose and David S. Cantor. Now these men guided Axelrod for some years. They got him his first job in journalism, and they all worked together in the campaign to elect your Marxist Mayor Harold Washington and your Marxist Senator Carol Moseley Brown. They were very close for several years. But Don Rose and David S. Cantor, before they picked up Mr. Axelrod, they ran a little publication in Hyde Park, Chicago, called the Hyde Park Kenwood Voices.
That's right.
And it was all about articles about trips to North Vietnam to aid the communists. There was articles about cutting sugarcane in Cuba to help Castro. It covered the SDS riots in Chicago in 1968 on the side of the rioters. It was the voice of the Communist Party in South Chicago. It also carried a regular column by a local congressman, some of you may remember, a man called Abner Mikva. He was very much part of their organisation. Mikva was a huge opponent of the Second Amendment in Congress, hated gun rights. When he left Congress, he became an open supporter of the Marxist organisation Democratic Socialists of America, which is very strong in Chicago. And as a law professor, he also became a mentor to Mr. Obama. He also mentored another lawyer I'm sure you're all familiar with, and that is Elena Kagan, who now serves on your Supreme Court. So Don Rose, one half of the partnership, long-time communist fronter. His Chicago Red Squad file, when you used to have a Red Squad that monitored radicals, describes him as a dangerous anarchist. He was a long-time executive member of the Chicago Committee to Defend the Bill of Rights, the leading Communist Party front in this city. He was the man who coined the phrase, The whole world is watching. He coined that during the Chicago riots of 1968, which he helped to organise. The other half of the partnership, David Cantor. His father was Harry Cantor, leader of the Massachusetts Communist Party in the 1930s. After serving a year for sedition in 1932, he took his whole family, including baby David, to the Soviet Union, where they worked for 5 years. Harry Cantor had a personal audience with Stalin and was employed translating Lenin's works from Russian to English. By the 1940s, late 1940s, Harry and David Cantor were both living in Chicago, both active in the Communist Party. In 1948, Harry Cantor bought a little communist publication called the Chicago Star off its owner, who was leaving for Hawaii. Guess who that might have been? Frank Marshall Davis. Go forward to 1960. Young David Cantor was running a little publication company out of Chicago, Transworld Publications. And his partner was a man called Leroy Wolins, another Communist Party member who later went on to found an organisation called Veterans for Peace, yet another anti-military Communist Party front. Their job was to distribute Russian and Communist literature all over your country, and they were paid a regular subsidy by the Soviet Embassy in Washington DC to do that. The two men were actually required to register as agents of the Soviet Union. Go forward to 1964. Is anybody here who cares to admit it that remembers the famous race between Barry Goldwater and Lyndon Johnson that year? Lyndon Johnson, the Democrat, won. We got the Great Society, the biggest expansion of federal government and welfareism since the New Deal. It put millions of black families and poor white families on welfare and destroyed millions of lives across this country. His opponent, his unsuccessful opponent, was Barry Goldwater, a conservative, a constitutionalist, and a real patriot. He would have loved the Tea Party, and you guys would have loved him. He's a great man. And had he won that election, this country would be a lot different today. But he didn't win. One of the main reasons he didn't, he was viciously vilified in the press of your country as a racist, a fascist, and an extremist. Anybody here heard any of those terms in recent times at all? Familiar in any way at all? No accident. One of the main sources of the vilification of Barry Goldwater was Transworld Publications out of Chicago. David Cantor's little communist Soviet subsidised firm. So your Mr. Axelrod, who's now trying to get your president re-elected, got his training at the hands of a Soviet-paid professional black propagandist and character assassin.
That's right.
And that is why, in my opinion, he uses the tricks he does today. So that brings me to what I consider the real agenda of the left in this country. Is it, as some say, to make this country like France or Europe? If only. I'm going to say what I think it is, but before I do, I want to build up a little bit of credibility for an Albuquerque high school math teacher named Mark Rudd. Now, why would I want to do that? Who's Mark Rudd? Mark Rudd was the brains of the terrorist Weather Underground organisation. He was right up there in the leadership with Bill Ayers and Bernardine Dawn. In 1968, he led the famous SDS riots at Columbia University, which made headlines around the world. In 1969, he was in Cuba training under a KGB major. In 2006, in Chicago, Mark Rudd and Bill Ayers and Bernardine Dawn and Jeff Jones, another terrorist Weather Underground leader, who incidentally helped write Obama's stimulus package, and Tom Hayden and Angela Davis and David Graeber, one of the leaders, founding leaders of the Occupy movement, and a whole bunch of other communists got together to set up a new organisation called Movement for a Democratic Society. was an umbrella organisation for the left in this country. And in 2008, they set up a subsidiary group. They called it Progressives for Obama. And this was led by Tom Hayden and two leading members of Democratic Socialists of America. And his job was to unify the left behind their candidate. And Mark Rudd endorsed Progressives for Obama. So what I'm trying to say here is that Mark Rudd is a key part of the US left, and he personally knows people who know Obama. So when he predicts Obama's agenda and says where Obama wants to take this country, I give him some credibility. Now, November 2008, just after the election, President-elect Obama appointed several conservatives to positions in the defence establishment. And a lot of people on our side of the fence breathed a sigh of relief. Thank God for that. You know, maybe he's not such a crazed radical after all. But the left were absolutely spewing. And Mark Rudd's inbox was filling up with emails from irate comrades all over the country. What the hell is our man doing putting conservatives into the military-industrial complex? And Mark Rudd knew he had to settle the comrades down, get them back on board with the agenda, back with the president. So he wrote a little article for the Rag blog out of Texas, very widely read on the left, November 28, 2008, still online. He called it Let's Get Smart About Obama. And I'm going to say a little bit of what he said in that article. Obama is a very strategic thinker. He knew precisely what it would take to get elected, and he didn't blow it. He knew he had to play to the centre, to not be run over by the Republicans or the press, or to scare centrist voters away. He made it. So he has a narrow mandate for change. The economic agenda will stress stimulus from the bottom at times and handouts to the top at others. Is that what happened? And never threaten the military budget. That will unite a huge majority of Congress against him. Leave the military alone because they are way too powerful for now. By the second or third year of this recession, people may begin to discuss cutting the military budget. So where are we now, ladies and gentlemen? We're 3 years in, right? You're worried about your jobs, keeping the IRS off your back, keeping your kids in college, keeping your businesses afloat. America is focused on the economic issues. And who can blame you? But while you're doing that, what is smiling Leon Panetta, a man who couldn't pass an FBI clearance to clean any toilet in any military base in this country, what is he doing at your Department of Defense right now? Slashing your military to ribbons. 20% of the US federal spending is taking more than 50% of the cuts. Mr. Obama has openly talked about cutting the US nuclear arsenal down to under 300 nuclear weapons.
That's a fact.
The Russians have thousands of them, and the best civil defense system in the world. And what was Mr. Obama doing in Korea a few months ago? When he was talking to Mr. Dmitry Medvedev, the Russian president, off mic, no one was supposed to be listening. They were talking about missile defense. Mr. Obama says, when I get re-elected, I will have more flexibility to deal with you.
That's right.
I need a bit more space. And Medvedev says, yes, I understand. I'll pass your message on to Vladimir. We are with you. That was the single most defining statement of your president's term of office, because that is the agenda of the left. Because they know you guys can survive a depression. They know you guys can survive losing some of your rights because you're Americans and you'll stand up and take them back. But have you ever been in the position before when your president and your Secretary of Defense are basically giving the Russians, who Mitt Romney correctly described as your #1 geopolitical foe, everything they have been after for decades. The number one priority of the left, why they have been funding the World Peace Council and funding your peace movement for decades, Mr. Obama is giving them everything on their wish list. And do you think they will not at some point take advantage of that? Do you think they've invested all that money for nothing? There's a reason for doing what they're doing. So I consider this serious, folks, because you've never been in this position before. And if Mr. Obama gets another term of office, you think about how much military you guys are going to have left. How much will be left? And you think about then, you will not even be able to defend your allies, Israel, Australia, New Zealand, Britain. You won't be able to defend them, but not only that, you will not even be able to defend your own homeland. And you have no choice but to be incorporated into some sort of United Nations world government scam, or face the combined military might of Russia and China and Iran and North Korea and Cuba and Venezuela and all their crazed allies with not a friend in the world to help you out. Is that a serious situation, folks?
Yes.
Mark Rudd hadn't finished. He went on to say, Obama plays basketball. I'm not much of an athlete. I barely know the game. But one thing I do know is you have to be able to look like you're doing one thing but do another. Right. That is why all these conservative appointments are important. The strategy is to feint right, move left. Any other strategy invites sure defeat. So what is Mr. Rudd admitting? Basically that his president scammed his way into the White House by pretending to be a moderate, but his agenda has always been left, and he has got your military as his number one target. So, but I don't want to, I don't want to depress you folks with all of that. Sorry, am I too late? Because look, I'm here for a reason. If I thought there was no hope for America, I'd be back in New Zealand right now, building bunkers and stocking up big time on baked beans. Okay? But I'm not. I'm here, touring around for months and months. I'm here because in 2008, the left thought they had a slam dunk. They had the House, they had the Senate, and they had the White House. All their ducks were in a row, and they were going to steamroll Middle America out of existence once and for all. But in 2009 and 2010, you people here, and all your friends, your millions of friends around this country, you stood up on your Constitution, and you marched, and you blogged, and you emailed.
That's us.
And you did. You stopped the left stone cold dead. You stopped them, you brought them to a screeching halt, and they don't know how to deal with it. And I'll tell you what, they hate you for it, which was why I love you for it. Whether you are aware of it or not, you gave your country a second chance. And the left, they're getting a bit cocky now. They think you have gone away. But you haven't gone away. You are in the state houses now, and the county commissions, and the school boards, and the Republican Party. You're getting rid of rhinos. You're altering the face of the GOP. You have started a revolution, the second American Revolution, that's going to affect your country for hundreds of years to come. And you're at the beginning of it. This is 1773 of the second American Revolution.
Amen.
Amen.
And you think back to the first revolution. 40% of the country loved the British, 40% didn't care, 10, maybe 15% had any idea of separating from Britain. but a bunch of farmers and lawyers and shopkeepers and blacksmiths and fishermen and seamstresses, united by the idea of liberty,
Patriots.
took on the greatest empire the world had known to that point and bloody well beat them.
Woo!
How miraculous is that? And how miraculous is that? You know, they pledged their life, their liberty, and their sacred honour, and look what they created. Look at the country they brought forth. And I talk, you know, I know when you're in history, you often don't see history. But I look at you, you know, and I talk to Tea Party folk all around the country, and they'll say, it's tough going, it's hard work, nobody's listening, nobody cares. But I come to you as an outsider, from an outside view, and I've been to Tea Party meetings all over this country, and I look at what you've achieved in 2 or 3 years, most of you political novices, and I am blown away. I'm stunned at what you've done. The revolution you guys have started, the way you've saved your country and given it a second chance, the ferment that's going on here just stuns me. And I would not have believed it 5 years ago. I was caught as much by surprise as the left were. And please also, do not think you're alone in this. Because there are millions of people around this world watching what you guys are doing every step of the way and are rooting for you for your victory. Because they know that if you can save your republic,
They save theirs.
and you will, that is going to inspire us and inspire freedom movements all over this globe. This is international. I was down with Glenn Beck's thing, Discovering Love. And one of the most inspiring parts of that event, which was very inspiring, was when he got a whole bunch of people on stage, and there were Australians and Japanese and Greeks and Italians and French. These were Tea Party folk from all around the world. So there are people watching you and rooting for you every step of the way. They are with you. And if you don't, you know, you think about, and I want to say too, you know, you've got 80 days to the election. The American Revolution was a 12 to 20 year process. There was the pre-fighting, the fighting, and the massive scrapping that went on afterwards. So this is the beginning. But the big thing in front of us now is the election. And you think about now, I don't have to tell you folks this, but maybe you can tell your people. If you can think of any time, any 80-day period in their life that a bit of hard work is going to bring a bigger investment for their children and grandchildren than the next 80 days, please let me know what it is.
Exactly.
Because this is the time to get stuck in and roll up your sleeves. And I just want to say, we all look back at history for inspiration, but I want to look forward for some inspiration. Because I will tell you, if you don't think your movement is historic, keep this thought in mind. In 200 years' time, there's going to be some kid in front of a civics class in Chicago or some city in the States, and he's going to puff out his chest with pride, and he's going to say to all his classmates, guess what? I did some research into my family background. I went way back, and I found out that my great-great-great-great-grandma and granddaddy, they were in the Tea Party.
That's right.
You know, back in the Obama years, when everybody thought this country was done, they stood up and they restored the republic. And the liberty and the freedom and the prosperity we enjoy today, we owe to what they did back then. And how cool is that? Can you think of any movement cooler to be part of than that?
None.
Anything more noble?
Nope.
So I just want to say to you folk, I'm so proud of what you're doing. I'm so grateful for what you're doing. Keep it up, and God bless America. Thank you.
Trevor. Denise, ask him to translate "si se puede" for the audience.
Ask me to translate what?
Si se puede.
One of the parts of my talk,
I had to cut it short tonight, but one of the things I talk about, the real big secret of communism is the ability of small Marxist parties, by infiltrating the local Democrat Party or the Labour Party, to get their policies implemented as the law of the land. And I'll give a little example. Out in California every year, they have a Cesar Chavez holiday. And that's to honour the great labour union leader, founder of the United Farm Workers, trained in Chicago by Saul Alinsky, the communist, mentored, worked with communists and socialists his entire life, and the man marched under the famous slogan, "Se puede." Se puede, yes we can.
There you go.
And that is where that slogan came from. There's a direct link between Cesar Chavez's communist movement and Barack Obama's communist movement.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Trevor.
Thank you so much. Actually, let's take 10 minutes, because that's going to be our last break, and then we're going to wrap it up. So if anybody would like to get a book, Trevor's going to be here just for a couple more minutes. Get yourself a snack on the way back if you want to get to the